All right. Welcome everyone to our project on the susceptibility and resistance of forests to invasive plants in Southwest Virginia. My name is Rebecca, and I am here with Monet, Leah, Haley, and Abby, and our lovely faculty member, Dr. Small. And so, our project is essentially on forest invasibility. So we went to Wildwood Park and we sampled several plots both in 2018 and both in this year, 2020. And we did specific plots. Some were on the interior or more in the forest, and some were on the exterior or closer to the paths in Wildwood Park. And we found some pretty interesting things, and we're very excited to share them with you.
All right, hi, my name is Abby, and today I'm going to be talking to you about some of the background information to help you better understand what exactly is going on. So first, I wanted to talk about what exactly is an invasive species. The legal definition is an alien species whose introduction does or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. In other words, invasive plants are non-native species that have been brought over from other countries either intentionally, like kudzu, or accidentally, and have caused significant environmental or other damage. One of the most important things to note is that when given the opportunity, they often displace or choke out native plants, which has compounding effects that can eventually change the entire forest structure. This can have drastic impacts on the species composition of forests, which can be a major problem for threatened and endangered species. Furthermore, endangered plants are expensive. Research has estimated that lost revenue due to invasive impacts and the cost of trying to control them combined is over $120 billion annually. Unfortunately, this high cost is in part due to our legislative habit of being reactive and not proactive to these detrimental species. And some of the examples in our area, we're going to go into more detail later, but as you can see, this is a very pretty picture of lineberry. If you're not from the area or you're not familiar with Wildwood Park, this is a little gem nestled in Radford, Virginia, and it's home to a wonderful diversity of many different birds, plants, and animals. And as you can see, this is just one of the many reasons why we want to protect this beautiful little place. So part of what we're looking at is the invasibility of forests and what makes them susceptible. So here we have this pretty cool graph from a paper by McDonald et al. And surprisingly, one of the most important factors in looking at what makes a location susceptible is how it was used historically. So if it was farmed even 100 years ago, today it is more likely to have invasive species in it. Kind of cool. And some of the other more important things that we'll be looking at is also the soil richness and the site wetness of the area. And what exactly are we doing? So in both 2018 and 2020, like Rebecca said, we are analyzing data that we collected and looking at, well, what kind of species are there and what can we do to prevent that? And ultimately, we would like to educate the public about, again, what these species are and how they can help keep Wildwood green.
Hi, my name is Leah Bailey, and I'm going to add a little bit more to what Abby said earlier about why invasive species are so important, why should we care about them coming in. So invasive species are really harmful to native environments because these species tend to be very non-specific, meaning that they are very flexible about the different kinds of environments that they can live in, the different kinds of food and resources that they can survive on. And because they're so adaptable and they proliferate or reproduce so quickly, they can come into an environment and they can outcompete the native species for the limited amount of space and a limited amount of resources. And so when you have these multitudes of different invasive species all coming into an area at once. They're outcompeting all the other native species, and this in turn leads to loss of biodiversity in these ecosystems, and it can even lead to extinction of these native species. And when you have this happen, these ecosystems can be permanently impacted because you have various chains of food chains that get impacted sometimes permanently because of the different variables that these species cause. So when you have this loss of biodiversity and different dynamics due to these invasive species, it can cause there to be a loss of productivity from the ecosystem services that these environments provide. These ecosystem services include things like soil filtration, water filtration, soil production, prevention of erosion, and just different things that keep these ecosystems productive and provide things that we really need. So it is detrimental to the ecosystems as well as us.
Right, my name is Haley Howerin, and we're going to jump right into the study site and field methods. So we conducted this study at Wildwood Park in Radford, Virginia, which is a 50-acre city greenway, and it's located in a type of wooded valley area, and it contains things like a stream. It contains multiple different habitats like woodland, marshy, meadows, etc. It also has limestone formations. And as for our field methods, we laid down many 100-meter plots, could be 5 by 20, 10 by 10, etc. And within each plot, we recorded the individual species, the invasibility and DBH of that, and the cover class of each strata, and a sapling tally for each species. And as for the less important, but still important, as we did incorporate it into our studies and tests, we recorded things like our GPS coordinates, things that deal with slope aspect and direction and topography and soil moisture. And then here is a little map of our field plots and subplots. So we had 17 plots total and 71 subplots. And 5 of these plots were from 2020, where 12 of these plots were from 2018. These red X's represent the main plots, and the white writing, each one represents a subplot. Some of them overlap and can be hidden, but that's overall the gist of the map. And then here are our methods for our data analysis. So we took all the data we got and we extracted and organized it to include the number of each invasive species within each of the subplots. And then within each subplot, we got the total invasive cover and invasive richness. And then for each of the species that were present, we got the total coverage, the number of plots, and the frequency of the species. And then we ran several tests to explore multiple different things. So we looked at the ratio of invasive species, just like the general ratio compared to all other species. And we looked at the invasive cover between interior and exterior sites, as well as the differences in forest classification richness between all of the species and just the invasive ones. Forest classification being dry calcareous, mixed mesophytic, or riparian.
Hi, I'm Monet Allen, and I'm going to go over the graphs that we have done to better understand what we did. So our first graph here, we see the total herbaceous cover versus total invasive cover. So what we're trying to look at is the correlation between both the total herbaceous features that we see on this graph. Is on the x-axis you see the total herbaceous cover, and the y-axis is the total invasive cover. Each data point represents both cover totals for each field plot. So the trends we see is we see an upward trend, which is a positive correlation. So there is some strong correlation within the biological standpoint between the total herbaceous cover and total invasive cover across plots. The ratio of the total invasive and herbaceous covers are strong and correlate between plots, and will most likely correlate within Wildwood overall. So our next one that we're looking at is the average percentage of cover of invasive. So our first cover presented of invasive are interior and exterior plots within Wildwood Park. So what we're looking at is, if it's interior, that means it's more off the trail, and then if it's exterior, it's on the trail's edge, which is more likely to be disturbed by humans, which means that invasive species will more likely grow. So what we're looking at is the x-axis plots is talking about plot location, whether it's interior or exterior, and then y invasive is the average. So our trends is that we see that 13% have invasive covers for the interior site, so that's not a lot at all. And exterior sites, we have 53% invasive cover. So that's about a 40% difference between interior and exterior coverage. So there is a large difference between both, and exterior sites are more susceptible to invasive than interior. So for this next one, we're looking at the frequency of non-native and invasive plants within Wildwood Park. So on the x-axis, we have the invasive species, and the y-axis is the frequency percentage. So what we're seeing is Japanese barberry is the most frequent that we've seen in Wildwood. Next is Morrow's honeysuckle, which the least frequency is burning bush. So the difference between the most frequent and then second most frequent is about 20%, and they're more likely to be seen throughout Wildwood Park. And so for our last graph, we're looking at the species richness versus invasive richness. Overall, in the species richness and invasive richness across classifications of dry calcareous, mixed mesophytic, and riparian, we see that invasive has way less richness in dry calcareous sites, but more richness in mixed mesophytic and riparian sites. So they don't really thrive in dry calcareous sites compared to the other ones. So some of the features that we see is the axes that represent the unitless measures of species variability between plots, and each data point represents the richness within a field plot. So in conclusion for this graph, invasives of Wildwood are most likely to thrive better in mixed mesophytic and riparian sites, or most likely to outcompete other species in these sites.
So, in summary, what we've found from our Wildwood Park data, we used the data collected from the plots, and you saw earlier how we collected that data through our specific methods. And so what we found is there is most likely a correlation between herbaceous cover and invasive cover, as we saw in one of our earlier graphs. There is a significant correlation between site location and invasive coverage. So as Monet said earlier, it's more likely that there's going to be more invasives at plot locations closer to the forest edge, next to trails, as opposed to locations further into the forest. We also found that there was Japanese barberry and Morrow's honeysuckle was reign dominant over other invasives in the area. And we also found that there was a greater invasive richness in mixed mesophytic and riparian sites compared to dry calcareous sites. And now for Wildwood's least wanted. So you've already heard about a couple of these species, but I am basically going to go over some of the frequency of how much they show up in Wildwood Park and how to identify them. What are some good characteristics to identify them by? So you can see at our top right, we have our Japanese barberry. That is one of our most dominant invasive species in Wildwood Park. Fun fact about these guys, they are sharp and pointy. Do not poke them. Be very careful, they hurt you. And so basically with Japanese barberry, you can tell by like the leaves, they have very specific leaves. If you touch it and you hurt, probably Japanese barberry. And so on our top left, we have Maro's honeysuckle, which you can tell that you can see the little pretty flowers there. And Maro's honeysuckle is our second most dominant invasive species. So you will see these a lot in Wildwood. Now, some other prominent, but not quite completely dominant invasive species that we can find in Wildwood are the multiflora rose, which you can see in the bottom left, and the Chinese privet, which you can see in the bottom right. Now, the multiflora rose, also pointy. They tend to have little thorns on them. So if you're looking and you see and you're walking through Wildwood Park and you see something that looks like a rose bush, probably multiflora rose. And for Chinese privet, they have these beautiful little white blooms there, and they tend to have very unique leaves as well. So yeah, when you go through Wildwood Park, keep an eye out for Wildwood's least wanted.
All right, so you've been hearing about all of these different sorts of invasive species, and I wanted to personally introduce you to one of the worst ones. Garlic mustard is really bad. So it's allelopathic, which means that it makes it harder for other species around it to grow. But more interestingly is trees and tree seedlings, their roots form mutualistic relationships with these cool arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. But garlic mustard actually has antifungal properties. So by making it harder for seedlings to grow with these fungi, it actually harms the plant. It makes it harder for them to grow. And then another really bad one that we have around here is Japanese stiltgrass. So I wanted to talk about a pretty interesting case study that happened in New Jersey. What happened was white-tailed deer, which we also have around here, they were overpopulated, and so they were overbrowsing on a lot of native shrubbery because they don't like to eat the Japanese stiltgrass. And because they ate everything else, there was a gap that Japanese stiltgrass just exploded into, and so it kind of took over. While it sounds bad, definitely, but it actually has even worse effects because it can actually wind up eventually changing the forest structure and the composition, and it can displace native species just by doing that. Very bad.
So overall, what did we gain from this? What did we learn? So if you recall, our goal was to assess how extensive the invasive problem at Wildwood Park is, and I believe we accomplished our goal. We found a strong correlation between interior versus exterior plots and invasive richness. So like we've said a couple of times, our exterior plots, the ones closest to the trail that are more likely to get disturbed by humans, tend to have higher amounts of invasives in them. And our interior plots are plots that are closer, that are further away from the trail, that are in the woods, tend to not have as many invasives. We also found a correlation between herbaceous cover and invasive cover. And we also found that Japanese barberry and Maro's honeysuckle tend to be the most dominant invasive species in Wildwood Park. So what comes next? What other research can we do from this? Well, we could always go through and collect more data from these plots. We can go through and do more sampling. You know, the more data we can get, the better. We can do different locations in Wildwood as well. And there's so much, that's basically what we can do for much more research we can do. And most importantly, what can you do to help? So there's a couple of things you can do to help reduce the spread of invasives whenever you go to visit Wildwood Park. One of the first and most important things is that if you are going hiking, make sure you clean your hiking boots before and after you go to Wildwood Park or any other park. because invasive species like to hitchhike in and out on hikers' boots. So it's very important to make sure that you clean them so you can thwart their plans. Another good thing to do that helps a lot is when you see invasive species, whether like plants, animals, insects, you can report them to the Department of Natural Resources in your area, but you can also use this really cool app called iNaturalist, where you can take a picture of the plant. You don't even have to know what it is, but you put the location gets put down in there, and other people can go in and identify the plant, and it allows us to also keep track of invasives and natives in that sense as well. Finally, the most hands-on thing you can do to help, go volunteer. Parks like Wildwood will hold volunteer events where they will basically guide you through removing these invasive species. And it's a great way to get involved with the community and to get involved with nature.
All right, well, we would like to thank the Office of Undergraduate Research and Scholarship for providing us with a space to present our research, and especially to the Biology Department of Radford for providing us with the necessary equipment that we needed to conduct all of our research. And we'd also like to give a special thanks to Dr. Small for all of her guidance, her help, her contagious enthusiasm, and all of her knowledge that's helped us with this project. And a special thanks to Coco for being our favorite colleague in the field. We have our literature cited and any questions.